Okay, I think it's that time, noon, time for Leaders Learning Live. So welcome everyone. I am Marissa McCasty. I'm the Leadership Development Manager for the SUNY SAIL Institute. And for those of you who this is your first Leaders Learning Live, the SUNY SAIL Institute provides professional development programming for faculty, staff, and students across the SUNY system. And we do this every third Thursday on different professional development topics. And this month's topic is helping leaders manage amidst budget constraints. And just some housekeeping items. If you have any sort of questions that you want to place in the chat or comments or things, different solutions that you have seen on your campus, feel free to include them. We want this to be as interactive as possible. And this webinar is going to be recorded. It's recording right now, so that you can view it at a later date or share it with any of your colleagues that you think would enjoy listening to it. And I am so happy to be able to provide this topic for you all because it's a very timely topic and something that a lot of us in different ways are grappling with. And as we try to navigate a changing financial climate, we hope that this webinar will give you some resources in order to do so. And we have here 3 different experts, and I'm not sure, did Bernadette join us yet?
I'm on, Marissa.
Oh, okay. Okay. Hi, Bernadette. All right. So we are ready to go. So yeah, like I said, we have 3 experts here in the budget and finance departments within their institutions. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Marty Dean. He's the Assistant Vice President for Budget and Planning and Reporting at SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University. Thank you, Marty, for being here. And then we have Vicky Furlong. She's the Associate Vice President for Finance and Budget and Interim Director of Admissions and Internal Control Risk Assessment Officer at SUNY Oswego. Very busy. And then we have Bernadette Selby, who is the Senior Associate Vice President for Finance and Deputy Chief Finance Officer at SUNY Downstate Health Sciences University. So thank you for the 3 of you for being here. Really appreciate it. And I'm just going to ask you all some questions around what does the budget process look like? Where does someone start if they've never managed a budget and they are tasked with it? And then also, what are some ways that we can stay innovative in these times of budget constraint? So I will start with Vicky. So Vicky, can you talk us through the budget process to give us a sense of the high-level context?
Sure, Marissa. Thank you so much for having me today. This is a really great opportunity to speak with a lot of my peers and from across SUNY. So a little bit about the budget process. In general, for those that aren't aware, the budget is made up of 2 pieces which represent direct state tax support that comes from the state of New York. And then the second piece is the tuition and fee revenue that comes from enrollment levels at the varying institutions across SUNY. So when you combine the 2 together, that makes up the general operational budget that supports the majority, or a lot of, in many cases, instructional components of an institution, faculty, staff, personnel, etc., along with varying operational needs of an institution. There are also subsets of the budget, auxiliary pieces that go along with the main operational budget, and those are made up of varying resources that the campus has access to. One being the residence hall system allows for room rents to be captured for the students that live in residence. And those funds are used to support the operations of the residence halls at each of the individual institutions. And that may be renewal-based, operational-based, supporting the infrastructure of the residence halls, and in many cases, sometimes even investing in renewal or building a new residence hall. So those are opportunities at the institutional level as institutions have related to the residence hall component. There are other financial resources that an institution may have availability to rely on, such as fee-based charges to various constituents on campus, particularly students, that pay for usage fees for a variety of programming, technology options, health services, athletic services, and other types of opportunities that the campus has before them. Finally, tuition revenue from our summer session programs makes up an additional form of infusion of resources to the institution. And for those institutions that may offer a summer session program or a winter/intersession program, sometimes those resources are additional opportunities to support the operations from an overall perspective. One of the things I will say about managing and controlling and developing a budget is start early. Usually at the beginning of January sometime, and sometimes even before that, we get a sense of where New York State is with respect to their ability to support institutions and the rest of the state agencies with the state tax support. So that usually comes from the governor in a message that he delivers in the New York State address sometime in January. And it sort of sets a little bit of the tone for where, as an institution and a collective of institutions, we can expect to see the budget playing out for the upcoming fiscal year. The fiscal year for SUNY starts in July and goes until June of the following year. And as many of you may know, the state fiscal year is an April to a March continuum. So there's a little bit of a mismatch there in terms of how SUNY operates versus the state, but nevertheless a very important piece of how we all gather our funds comes from state support. So one of the things I would mention is to start early in your planning so that you have an idea of how the budget can be managed, particularly in a situation where we're in now, where we are facing not only from a New York State budget shortfall, but the effects of the COVID pandemic that have been before us since mid to late March. So, and when we're looking at developing a budget, there's many ways in which you can develop the beginning budget for a year. Some institutions use what's called a zero-based budgeting, where they start fresh or from scratch every July, and they reinvent the budget needs of the various department levels or divisional levels at the institution. Some institutions may employ a base plus model, and that would be whereas you would start the fiscal year with whatever you had last year and then either add or subtract in some cases away from those base funding levels in which you've had in prior years. And there are many other models which institutions can employ to determine how to distribute the operational funds that are needed to sustain core instructional support, student-centered and student service supported programming, and really, frankly, just the operational needs of the institution, keeping the heat and the lights on, supporting scholarship needs, a ton of variety of items that really just, make up the complement of what it takes to manage an institution. I mentioned a little bit about developing the budget, and at Oswego, I will share, we use a divisional model whereby we have our main divisions broken out into 5 main areas, which support our academic area, our administrative area, our student affairs area, our development and alumni, and the senior staff, which reports to the president. And so each of those areas has a main budget which they use to operate across the institution and are managed centrally up to the vice president or the president in that case of those areas to guide and support the operational needs of those divisions. General expenditures that we're looking at, and I mentioned this earlier, is a large portion of expenditures, as you can imagine, that comes from operational needs is payroll. You know, we invest highly and heavily and importantly in the people of our institution and the people that provide the services necessary to sustain an academic learning community, which is of high value and high quality. So we invest a lot in our, you know, our personnel capital as to support the needs of the institution and our students, which we ultimately serve. Let's see, some logistics about the budget process. It typically gets underway, as I mentioned a little earlier in the year. As of the July 1 timeframe, a new budget year will start. And that's typically when the campuses start to prepare the really deep down account level detail that will guide the department levels and managers in managing their resources over the course of the fiscal year. One of the things we are looking at this year, and it's no secret and it's been relatively and widely publicized, is New York State is currently experiencing a deep budget deficit in which their support to institutions is in question at that point, at least at the levels that we have seen in the past. So one of the things that's important as an institution, along with senior leadership at the institution, is to determine how and if cuts are necessary, how they will be deployed across the institution while maintaining and preserving not only the educational excellence, but also the student-centered experience, which many and most students are expecting, even potentially in a limited fashion or a revised fashion upcoming this fall and into the spring. Marty, Bernadette, did you have anything else to share about your processes?
So we, you know, you did a great job actually explaining it. We have a hospital as well. We're a medical center, so we budget for several different funds. But it's basically a very similar process to what Vicki just mentioned. We actually start also in December and January. We actually started this year, and we were planning to have a budget, even though Form 1 isn't really due till the middle of August. We were really planning to have a budget out to our departments by July 1. Then COVID struck and kind of everything went off the table. But no, I don't have anything else yet.
And Bernadette, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add to that.
So as you know, Marty and I, we're from the same organization, and his comments is the same as mine. When the process of budgeting, when you start to look at all the different pieces that makes up downstate budgets, it's kind of very unique, because not only is the hospital, but then we also have the foundation, and I being the treasurer for the foundation, we also have to look at so many different pieces of the budget that makes up the whole. So it's definitely unique in every sense in terms of what makes up the process.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. And thank you, Vicki, for that overview. I think that there's a lot of pieces that go into it. So it was nice to be able to hear you put that all together. And my next question is for Marty. And so there might be some folks on the call that are very new to budgets. And what would you say to someone who's new to it? Where do they start? And what are some skills and what are some things that they need to know in order to properly manage a budget?
I would have to say that I think that, I'll answer this in a couple of different parts. First of all, I think it's always really important that you know actually what the goals or, what you want to accomplish, or what your president wants to accomplish. So it's really important to know the goals of your institution, because everything kind of flows down from there, because you'll understand then where your department and what you're doing actually fits into the whole, major plan. The second thing is it's very important to understand your budget. So especially if you're a new manager and you're getting a budget that's already existing, you should actually take it apart and look at the different pieces of it. You should figure out how much is for personnel services, which is typically the largest part of your budget. It certainly is with us. And, even understand how those positions are funded. As I mentioned, on our campus, we have a hospital, we have 5 schools, and several of our several of our support positions are split funded. So if you are, if you're managing one of the support departments, there's a good chance that you're getting funding from like all over the place. So it's important that you understand that and how, what the makeup of your personnel services budget is. And then it's also important to understand your other than personnel services, which is your OTPS, which are supplies and services. Exactly what makes up that budget. And again, if it's your first time and you're just getting into the organization, you may not be able to do this day one, but it would be important, certainly when you have to do your budget for the following year, is to understand exactly what it is in that you're really buying in your OTPS and actually what it's used for. And Vicki mentioned earlier that one of the budget processes people could use is a zero-based budget, and that is basically starting from scratch. And I would definitely, I think that's actually probably the best way to learn your budget, is to start actually from scratch. And if you have people reporting to you, they should come to you and they should be able to tell you, like, what they're spending their money on and why they're spending it on those items. Because once you understand that and you get that kind of a foundation there, it's much easier to manage and defend as you go forward. It's also important that you once you have your budget there, that you start tracking your budget. So every month, at least monthly, typically people do it monthly, but at least monthly, you should be able to reconcile your budget. You should be able to kind of like, balancing your checkbook. Though I don't think anybody has checkbooks anymore. I do. So it's important to understand, like, what expenses have come in, and if they've been, if they've been actually paid for. It's going to be actually challenging this coming year with the way that we have to do allocations. Because again, the state is kind of what, it's kind of, I was going to say wacky, but I'll say interesting. They have an interesting way of budgeting based on allocation. But what typically happens is, you have, when you cut a PO, you cut a requisition and you cut a PO, the allocation is actually kind of taken and put to the side. So when the invoice comes in, you always know that you're going to have the money to pay for that purchase. And this year, what we're being asked to do is to only allocate for what you need to pay for. Like, actually, the memo that I read said 2 weeks ahead of time, which seems to be a little will be definitely challenging. So we're kind of doing things in a totally different way, but that's why it's very important that you do monitor your budget it's even more important that you monitor your budget every month to see exactly what is coming in and what's going out. I think that it's also a very good idea if you have people who are reporting to you, that you include them in your budget, in monitoring your budget. So it's not just the manager's job to monitor the budget, but you kind of make it everybody's job to manage it, or at least communicate to them how you're doing throughout the year, because your staff can certainly assist you in controlling expenses. And then when it comes time to actually do your budget for the following year, I think that it is, if you know, as I mentioned, it would be great to know exactly how every penny that is in your budget is being spent. But if you are going to ask for something additional, that you actually back it up with a plan or some type of business plan as to why you're asking for something, and what benefit it's actually going to give the organization. I think that's kind of key as well.
Definitely.
And then you had asked also as part of that question was the what skills would you need to really properly manage a budget? I actually think that it's pretty basic stuff. I mean, sure, having a degree in finance would be great, but that's not always, those people aren't always the best people to manage budgets, but organizational skills, I think, are key. I mean, you need to be a very organized person. You need to be able to communicate very well. And you need to have good decision-making skills, which I think is basically, you know, it's a foundation for, I think, any good manager, all, you know, not just for budgets, but for other reasons as well. But I would say that would be what you would need to really.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It was helpful.
Yeah, thank you. And just as a reminder, as we're talking here in this conversation, if a question that you have pops into your mind, feel free to put it in the chat and we can answer it as we go. But you made some really great points about priorities, which brings me to Bernadette. Why is it important for us to think about priorities when we are budgeting?
Hi, yes. So I think budgeting and work planning works hand in hand. For a fiscal year, a department or organization should prioritize for specific projects to ensure that available funding is accessible and available for documented reasons. I think when you prioritize, you are mainly creating effective spending plans. And like Marty said, you should always have your managers understand that process and understand why it's important to prioritize. Leadership internally, I know we do it, and it's being managed by Marty, where we have to create a work plan and a robust budget process where you mandate departments to not only be clear in their overall budget presentations, but be able to articulate where their funding sources are coming from. You know, how are their expenses estimated, or how are the assumptions derived? Because department must be able to show that the decisions or the presentation to the budget committee, which we have, and like I said, Marty and another colleague is heading, they have to be able to present their clear game plan for their department and not budget in a manner where you're always looking to move funds or even try to change where you have generated revenue and things like that, but making sure that when you're looking at your revenue and expenses, you are aware and you can come up with those assumptions clearly. As we all know, the pandemic, COVID-19, created a huge havoc on all of our funding and blew the budgets apart. But things like that, when we're trying to anticipate, these are things that are certainly out of the norm. So as we anticipate another surge, we should therefore continue to now, I urge everyone, which I'm sure everyone is already thinking about, an emergency fund, because for the upcoming fiscal year, because we know there are projects that you are undertaking currently, such as the social distancing accommodation, virtual learning classes, that you move away from the typical classroom education to online classes. You may have to put more money into your IT systems to be a little more manageable when you have so much people on the bandwidth. So this has certainly changed our priorities when budgeting today. However, if you focus on the SWOT mentality, you come up with, and as you know, everyone, hopefully everyone who's on the phone understands SWOT analysis is your strengths, your weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Especially, I like to focus on the threats because these are typically external forces. And when an organization looks at their threats, they are able to say, okay, what in the environment can cause us, our business, to go wrong? And that's exactly what happened with the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think when I like to say, instead of trying to out fires, if you do not prioritize, then you'll definitely blow your budget out. So we want to think about our short-term plans, our long-term plans, because sometimes you have to budget currently for your short and long-term plans because there is funding and there are expenses that may occur currently for long-term plans. So when you're doing prioritization, you want to make sure you indicate, is it something that's happening right now during this budget year, or is it something that's happening in the future? Because in prioritizing, you have to focus on looking for ways to fund or pay these critical items. So again, with planning, you have to be able to work with your staff members, one, include, like Marty said, include your direct reports. And one of the things I did in the past where every single month I give a report on the financial status. So they are able to say, are we on task? Are we meeting our budget? We actually have in the BI system the stoplight, so you see immediately, is it red, green, or yellow, right? And I'm sure if everyone is aware of the BI reporting system, they would know that's something that we have trained all of our leaders, and we made it mandatory that these folks come out and use, because I'm a huge metric person where I say if it's not written, it's not being done. So you have to be able to look at your metric, understand what it indicates, but also to be able to manage your budget, get any errors, because we all know sometimes someone may erroneously use your budget, your accounting unit number. All of a sudden you see the emergency room expense showing up in the mailroom expense. And something like that, if not corrected timely, you could end up showing a red in your budget. So you want to make sure that not only are you prioritizing the budget process, but you're managing expectations as you go along. And I think once we drive that down to the frontline staff, they understand, they are cognizant as to, okay, we have 5 FTEs and we are not to go over this, we got to manage with that. That's something that you want to make sure everyone is aware of why we are doing that. And a lot of times, like, you know, our biggest expense is our FTEs. And I know everyone, and Marty could attest to this, because in every presentation you said, listen, right now the entire state is facing a budget deficit. Yet every presentation that came in, and Marty could talk to this, they all showed up with additional funding requests. So it's like nobody got the memo. But we sent it out to the entire organization. So again, in coming to give a priority list, you want to understand, what are my priorities and why is it important to me? And once you have that in mind and you demonstrate that, I think you're able to now focus in the right manner and address all things that are priority for your area. Again, priority for you may not be priority for the organization. So it has to roll up to the mission and the goals of the organization. Because I may be saying, you know what, priority for me is to make sure I get the students enrolled in classes. The hospital side may say, priority for me is making sure I take care of these patients that are critical. So every area has their own prioritization. However, it's based on how you demonstrate it as well as why is it a priority. So you keep that in the forefront based on departmental structures, but also understanding that there's a bigger mission for the entire organization that you should be attesting to.
Thank you. Yeah, you've given us a lot to think about and to consider when we're doing that, and that from what I'm hearing is that from all of you is that it really is a team effort, and to consult with your team and just keep them in the loop and be transparent about the budget is really important. And I do have a question along those lines for Vicki and Marty. What is your advice when there are those that are listening that have different priorities than others on their team, and either for those directly managing the budget or as a team contributor? And similarly, what advice would you give for those in discussions with their team to explore changes or priorities as we manage the COVID-19 crisis?
Marty, I can start just quickly. I think I'll echo a little bit of what Bernadette said. I think the priorities of the institution and those that flow up the chain of command to the mission and vision and goals are those that should be centered around when making budget decisions. Sometimes it's a little hard in individual areas, can only sort of see the priority from within. It's important that, this happens for this reason, but it's really sort of a siloed approach as opposed to how will this affect or impact or benefit the entire institution? How will it benefit our core instructional mission? How will it benefit our student-centered, student-serviced areas? As opposed to, it just being something on a siloed operation. So I think keeping those tenets in mind, and even in so much as you're able to align it with a strategic plan that your institution has before it, and they have designed certain metrics, certain objectives and goals and key impacts that you want to get to over the course of a 3 or a 5 year strategic plan. Those should be conversations that are had specifically when you're talking about what priorities of the institution are important. Certainly there are many times where priorities are rose to the top because of a particular incident, most notably COVID. Currently, the priorities of our institution are the health and safety and well-being of our campus community, our students and faculty and staff, and all of those that come to the institution. That may not have been necessarily the way we would have budgeted items in the past or budgeted for spend in the past, but given the current situation, that has become a very important priority of the institution, along with investments in technology, along with investments in our online learning platforms. One of the things that's important to be is very flexible and be very nimble in our ability to shift resources to address competing priorities. And one of the components is ensuring that the entire campus community understands the reasons for whatever it is that you're doing. I think Oswego has a budget advisory group that is a wide cross-section of individuals across our campus. We meet relatively regularly, and it seems like we're meeting even more regularly given the current budget situation. But this gives us an opportunity to share those ideas, to share those needs, and to share those reallocation of necessary resources so that priorities are aligned with the mission, vision, and goals of the institution. And it's not just based on a particular area or a particular focus. And the key is, once again, it's to be flexible. It's important to be able to react and pivot when necessary. And timely is another key. If we wait too long to react or to make changes, then we may be in a more of a dire situation than we otherwise would have by realigning priorities and realigning our resources accordingly.
Definitely, yes. Thank you.
And I don't really have much to add. I mean, Vicki did a great job, and Bernadette. But people have probably different departments or different schools will come up with different goals that they really want to accomplish. And again, if it really has to come down from the top and what the institution, presidents and the institution's goals are. And while if there is a really good idea, you put a business plan together, you kind of present it, and hopefully it will happen. But there's chances it won't happen because of limited funds. So it could be a really good idea, but if there's only a limited pool of money, and you have to kind of live within this one pool of money. So just kind of echoing what Vicki said. I totally agree with her and Bernadette. And as far as the with COVID-19, and again we go back to that limited pool of money. So if you have to start, and you should be planning on what additional expenses that you might have already had or you will have, you need to put that kind of away in a pot to address those additional expenses. And again, we don't know really how long this is going to last. So it could be, just through the fall semester and things could get back to normal in January. It could be till next fall that it doesn't really get back to normal. It may never get back to normal. We may have permanent, more distant, or distance learning may be a more permanent, thing. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just staying flexible with whatever, whatever is coming our way, and being, proactive as much as possible. Thank you. And I know that you all had talked about the budgets and but as far as the decision-making process in managing a budget, what are some additional things to consider? And this question is for Bernadette and Marty.
Well, again, I think that it is, I'll start Bernadette. I think that it is just important that you just look at what you can afford. I mean, I think it all comes down to that. So you need to just see what you can afford, understand, I mean, there's a bunch of different things you could do as far as there's a bunch of different things you could do. Again, you need to understand your programs. You need to understand, if you, because I'm sorry, Marissa, your question again was, what can we do because of tighter budgets, or?
Yeah, just the decision-making process, as far as just some extra things to consider when you are in the decision-making process when you're managing your budget.
So again, and when you're managing a budget in a tighter frame, like when things change, right? That's what you're basically getting at. So because you get a budget for the beginning of the year, and at that point you should, kind of adjust to whatever that budget's going to be. But as we're learning now, there are times when your budget can get even tighter, and exactly what do you do to address that? And it's really actually, especially in our environment, it's very difficult to do that because there's a lot of constraints that we have. We're not a real flexible organization. We can't really just go and say, okay, we're going to cut this program, cut this program, cut this program, because it doesn't happen that quickly. It has to happen over time. So, but what we should be doing is we should be looking at, and it's what we're doing here, is we're looking at everything. We're looking at, what programs we have, and what classes we're teaching, and what degrees we're giving out, and are they profitable? Are they not profitable? And not that we would cut ones that weren't profitable, or we cut, but we just want to know, because again, we don't have a really good handle on that, but we are working on getting a really good handle on it. And by doing that, we're also trying to benchmark with other institutions. So, and again, it's not, we don't have a really good, like we have a really good benchmarking system for healthcare on the hospital side. We don't really have a good benchmarking system on the school side, on the academic side. So we're looking to do that as well. And again, like, what a lot of places do, and we certainly have done it as well, and we don't really do it with much success, is we can say, okay, we're in this financial crunch, or we need additional money for COVID supplies, so we're going to get that from everybody by taking 5% out of everybody's budget. And that normally is not the most successful way of doing things, because it doesn't often work. But so we look at ways of doing that too. It's difficult. I mean, I don't think there's any magic answer to this. But again, I think just it all goes back to it really all goes back to understanding, understanding your budget, and where, what are programs that are actually making a lot of money, and what are programs that are not making money. Mm-hmm. And we're not a big undergraduate program. We don't have big undergraduate students, or too many undergraduate students here. So we don't have like we don't have an athletics program. We don't have a lot of things like that. So it's a little bit different than say Vicky's campus.
Right. It's a different model. And Bernadette?
Yeah, and I think because we are in a unionized environment, it makes it so much more difficult for us to look at budget constraints, or even trying to tighten your budget, because one of the things that you always look to is reducing your highest expense, which is your people, right? And with that said, you can't just say, and typically you always know if it's last in, first out, these are the more productive folks, right? So in looking at programs today, you also want to see those people that was considered essential and non-essential, and you have voids, or you have vacancies, people retire or resign for whatever reason. Are you going to fill those? Is it something that we really need, or is it just a body that was there? And if they were non-essential and working from home, there are some people who has been home since March, and because they're non-essential and they don't even have access to systems that they are now working, but based on our state union policy, you have to pay them, right? So you look at that, but also management needs to, I guess, think of being creative, like implementing early retirement plans, or coming up with looking at worked hours as opposed to just how many people are here working, and come up with decisions that they can really show that, look, we have evaluated, this is something that's not necessary, but also understanding the programs. Like Marty said, if you look at certain programs, is it something that is really having a positive P&L, or is this something that has always been draining? If you have new programs that are coming on site or being implemented, how are you going to fund this? How quickly are the funds being available? So we look at research programs. A lot of times those grants come in immediately. So you know you have the funding, and these are things that we try to implement immediately, because not only do you get the revenue immediately, you're also able to fund the expense without having to tap into your current budget. So I think in looking at how you can make the budget even tighter is just articulating to every leader within their own areas to be able to demonstrate, because you'll find that a lot of times when you do this, there are some leaders who don't even have a clue. They say, oh, this is how it's always been, or this person who was here before me, this is how they gave it to me. And when you're asking them different questions, you hear that. And I think that with the forum that we now have in terms of a budget committee, just sitting on the committee and looking at different facets of the organization, listening as to how others operate. It brings more light to why it's important for that particular leader to make sure when their departments come in front of that committee, it's clear what the expectations are. So I really, really like the new process, because I know in the past, everybody was just saying, spend, spend, spend. I'm new to the state. I've been only here 5 years. So coming to the state from private organization was very eye-opening. It was like, oh my God, you don't have a budget? So with implementing a budget here was such a great thing. Actually, they had a budget. There was the Form 1, but everybody just took what was there and moved on, right? As opposed to saying, how do I now feed Form 1 with my information to show that my program has a component to the overall budget for Downstate. So with this new process, I really like the fact that the committee hears, and you have to present in front of them and demonstrate to them why you think your budget must go forward and be approved before it's even given to you.
Great, thank you. Yes, and there I did see that there were a couple questions in the chat, so I definitely want to get to those. But before that, there was someone who had submitted a question that they wanted to pick your brains on. So, Vicki, how do you build your digital and online footprint amidst budget constraints?
So yeah, this is a great question. And for a lot of institutions that were either not there or only slightly there, they were thrust into at least the, we'll call it the online footprint, almost head on in March when, you know, a lot of campuses took that opportunity to start introducing courses that were online. One of the things I would say is to build a plan. You know, to understand where do you want to be. So particularly with your digital footprint, if you are not, you know, social media experts, if you do not have individuals that can manage and monitor those, look from within. At the majority of these educational institutions, we have faculty that, you know, teach probably courses in strategic communication, or we have staff that dabble in it. And our most important resource are students. It's probably a wonderful opportunity to employ a student as a GA, or just maybe even a student worker, to help and assist with social media. It's frankly their wheelhouse. They know the platforms, they know the players, they know the lingo, they know a lot about what, you know, and they're there. They live and breathe and die sometimes by their social media outlets. So they have a lot of expertise that they can share with the institution on how to make sure the sort of the impact of, you know, insert SUNY name is out there and appropriate and monitored and managed. You know, sometimes social media becomes, frankly, the bane of existence from senior leadership, because we get notified of various posts by some of our current students, by some of our former students, by some of our alum, et cetera, and it draws a little bit of a negativity towards the institution. But, you know, these are types of things that can be managed in-house. It's not, you know, anything that we should, you know, in terms of budgetary options, have to hire a national firm or even really seek resources outside of what we have available to us at the institution. It's truly an opportunity to become creative and to utilize those resources that we have available to us. In terms of more of an online footprint, you know, everyone manages their website and you know, has the opportunity to put data out there, to put information out there. I mean, most times this is where people find out about you first, or word of mouth, frankly. But, you know, the students are searching. If your major or a program that you offer doesn't come up on their search when they're first looking, they don't even consider you. So it's very important to ensure that what you want to display in your online and digital footprint is really what you want to display in your online and digital footprint. And a lot of times a great resource to do that is have a student start fishing around, have a student start looking at that. We have a couple of interns that work in our Office of Communications and Marketing to do just that. They, they find things on our website that maybe need to be revised, or they need to be enhanced, or they need to be clarified. And, we do all of this sort of in-house and part of a sort of a mini digital audit that we do in-house of all of our digital communications. And the final piece, particularly, with online, is to ensure that, we at Oswego, we have a very hardy online program. We have fully online majors that we offer. We have instructional designers that assist our faculty and staff in developing these platforms within our Blackboard Ultra platform where we deliver these courses. So, while it was a little bit of a heavy lift, just from frankly a sheer volume standpoint, to move to sort of an all online and virtual platform for instructional purposes earlier this spring, we were able to do so in a relatively expedient fashion because we have already had some of those platforms developed, and we have some experienced faculty and staff that are, on with us, that were very gracious in developing and delivering course information, tips and tricks to some of our faculty and staff that maybe didn't have the expertise to move to a very virtual platform. So my summary is you don't need to spend a lot of money to ensure that you are highly visible in a virtual setting. Just sort of look from within and try to find creative solutions that are already there at your institution. And finally, I might add, if potentially sharing resources with another institution that has some of those experts on staff. They may be more than happy to provide the similar tips and tricks, or maybe even a development document or something that can be shared with your faculty and staff and other individuals at your institution.
Thank you. That was definitely a great question and a great answer. So hopefully that was helpful. And I would agree with Workplace. I know many of us are on Workplace. Maybe that is a platform, if you do have a solution that you haven't heard yet today and you wanted to share that, or even in the chat, if there's something that your campus is doing and that you wanted to share with the group, feel free to do so. So with the next 7 minutes here that we have together, I want to get to these questions. There was one question, and it says, in the pre-canned reports in BI, when exporting to a CSV, the allocations, encumbrances, and expenditures come up as the, quote, amount as the title of the column in Excel. Is there any way to fix this? It's a very, very specific question. And if we need to follow up with anyone, we can do that too.
Yes, I don't know the answer to that question.
No.
There is somebody in SUNY who does that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so we'll make sure to follow up with Catherine on her question about that.
Deborah Haynes is probably the person. Thanks, Wendy.
Also, Catherine, I'm not sure if you're aware, every Thursday, I believe it is, the BI working group has, like meetings. I know some staff in my office participate in them. That might be another opportunity for you to get some more information on how BI works, reporting, and put your plug in for some upgrades and enhancements. So just another thought.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And another question here from Karen. In identifying revenue enrollment opportunities, campus allocation processes, combined with hiring freezes, make it difficult to quickly scale high demand programs as faculty line seed funding available to colleges to hire faculty for these high yield programs, as documented by applications that far exceed seats and wait lists, which have high profit potential.
So I'm just going to share, I'm not aware necessarily of any seed funding in terms of SUNY supported, with the exception of the Prodigy funding, which is specifically dedicated towards individuals. I'm gonna botch this because I'm not involved in it on our institution. It's the sort of a diverse hire kind of a program. Aside from internally sort of reallocating those resources, specifically if you have a vacancy related to a sort of a retirement or a resignation, and internally redistributing those available lines so that you could hire faculty for high program yields, that would be sort of an opportunity, but it would have to, have to be done on a campus by campus basis or some sort of buy-in at the institutional level.
Thank you. And there was one more question. The matter of early retirement keeps coming up on campuses, but as we previously mentioned, all campuses are facing budget deficits. Since you need local cash for early retirements, what ideas do you have for campuses to take the potential advantage of budget benefits realized with early retirements? These are some great questions, very specific.
So I brought up that question only because it did come up in our some of our discussions, and the way we were looking at funding that was through our foundation or our CAO fund, where there's a presidential fund where we actually have some monies there, and we were looking at how much do we need to offer that, and also in terms of just looking at the metrics and how many people qualified for it, and based on the last time it was offered, what percentage actually accepted that, because that was the deciding factor. And we found that a lot of people did not take advantage of that. However, with COVID-19, we are thinking that a lot of people may think differently than they thought previously. So we are looking at, we looked at funding through that, but as you know, with the pandemic, everything took a back seat for us to deal with COVID-19.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Thank you. And I'm just looking through here. There are a few comments and questions, but Wendy, thank you for answering Catherine's question on that. And she just had noted that per direction from SUNY system, no early retirement program should be offered right now. So any other last minute questions that are burning that you must ask? Okay, and I just wanted to just kind of wrap up with, are there any resources that we haven't talked about that you would suggest for the folks on this webinar to manage their budgets more effectively?
One of the things I'll just share is, I think one of the greatest resources, particularly if you have individuals that are seasoned veterans at your campus, is your campus budget office. I think they have a wide breadth of the operational needs of the institution. They sort of in tune a little bit with how SUNY operates, how the state operates, how the monies get back and forth in terms of that. But in terms of, outside resources, I've always felt comfort and knowledge from some of my counterparts at sister institutions. I appreciate the ability to send a quick message to another budget individual and, throw some ideas back and forth about, that I'm having. And particularly if they've shared the same thoughts or have instituted something there with some great level of success or not. And then that helps me proceed. So I've always felt that my counterparts at other institutions are a fantastic resource.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
Yes.
I think definitely.
Oh, go ahead.
And I think the network is key because, like Vicky, we are with Wendy and everyone in our circle. We think from the SAIL Institute, and specifically, we came together and we are long life friends now. So we tap into each other whenever there is a need. So I think networking is key. And also, there are a number of folks in the budget office at the state level that can really help you. I know Josh and all these guys, they are so hands-on that you can reach out to them and they would respond. So when you look at Drew and all these guys, you can reach out, but you want to make sure you create a network and you're able to just bounce questions off of folks like all of us here who is part of the SAIL Institute, and definitely you'll get directed in the right path. Also, I suggest one of the main resource is pen and paper, going back to the basics. Just write it down. Again, write down anything you get and start building on that, because sometimes we'll hear something and you walk away and you forgot what you heard. So definitely.
Well, thank you very much.
Write it down.
Yes, that's great. And both, I didn't mention this before, but Vicki and Bernadette were part of our Chief Business Officers Leadership Academy. So it's so nice for them to be with us today and sharing that knowledge that they learned. Up on the screen here is contact information for all of our panelists. And if you want to ask them a question, or like they said, to just reach out and don't feel intimidated, we're all in this together. So there's their contact information. Joyce, our graduate assistant, put a survey into the chat, so feel free to fill that out and let us know. And if there are other topics that you're struggling with and you want us to put a Leaders Learning Live on it, please let us know. Thank you, Marty, Vicki, and Bernadette. This has been very great, and I'm wishing you all a great day, and stay tuned for next month Leaders Learning Live.
Thanks, Marissa.
Thank you.
Bye.